Hospitality is where we started, and we've transitioned into some other business ventures.
I just believe that I can always train for skill, but I can't train you to be nice.
And I kind of gave that up and decided to just go a different direction.
And now, here's Just Sayin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Just Sayin Podcast. So I've been reading lately. My high school English teacher, Mrs. Monroe, would be shocked to hear that. Well, actually, I've been listening to books via Audible, because I'm getting to that point where reading relaxes me and I wind up falling asleep mid-chapter. Just saying. So I came across an interesting book, which is also available on paperback, called Sorry, I Missed You. And I finished the 8 hours or so of audio recordings in 2 days. That's why I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk about it today. Okay, so before I introduce our guest on the Just Sayin Podcast, question for you. How many of us have had someone ghost on us, just left the conversation, never to be heard from again? I know I have. And the question is, how do you let someone go when you don't know why they left? Well, that's today's guest on Just Sayin Podcast, the author of a very entertaining fiction entitled Sorry, I Missed You, which was just published by Lake Union on June 1st and has quickly been received with some glowing reviews as well. She has a very interesting background, came into writing professionally in a somewhat roundabout way. We will talk about that, as well as the art of character development, the process of getting published, handling book reviews, and so much more. So joining us all the way from Regina, Saskatchewan, is the author of Sorry, I Missed You, Suzy Krause. Suzy, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, it is great to talk to you, especially after reading the book, because I found it extremely entertaining. But I want to first get into how you were inspired to write the book. And I think the story goes that you were walking by a house in your neighborhood that looked maybe like it was haunted, and it had 3 mailboxes, and that's all you had to go on. Is that true?
Yeah, and I just was thinking about all the people that would live there and if they ever even met each other, if they got along with each other, or, you know, what would happen if a letter were to get into the wrong mailbox or something like that.
It's amazing how the creative mind works. And that when people, if you've read the book, great, because we asked you last week to either download it or, get a copy so you'll know what we're talking about. If not, get a copy and take a listen to it or read it, because the background to this is really mind-boggling when you think about the fact that you just walked by this house and you came up with this book. So that I thought was really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the premise of the book without any spoilers or anything like that. Just give us an overview of what people can expect.
Yeah, so it's a book about 3 women who have all been ghosted on by someone very important to them. And they all end up renting one of the 3 suites in this old haunted house in Regina, Saskatchewan. And one day a letter shows up in the mailbox, because in this book there's only one mailbox for all 3 suites. And they can't tell who it's for because it's kind of been destroyed somehow. And so they all instantly have someone in mind that it's probably from. And the only thing that they can figure out from the letter is a meeting place that the person wants to meet them at this coffee shop in Regina called the Paper Cup. And so they decide to stake out the coffee shop until that person shows up. And it's the person is very important to each person. So they're willing to wait it out and see who shows up.
Yeah. So that's the premise. Did you ever have anyone ghost on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably why it was such a fun book to write, is because it's a very universal experience. I feel like everyone can think of somebody that is ghosted on them. And so it was fun to write 3 different ghosting stories, because I could think of so many instances that I'd been ghosted on, and I wanted to write a lot of them.
Can you share one of them with us?
I can think of a friend that I was really good friends with for many, many years, and she just stopped talking to me out of the blue, and it was really strange, and we never connected again after. And I kind of reached out half-heartedly a couple of times, but it was just the end of the friendship. And it was fine. Like, I think sometimes adults just grow apart and you don't really know why. And maybe she doesn't even know why, but yeah, you never get to know.
Yeah. And so that's always rolling in your mind. Like, what happened? Did I say something? All that stuff. And I know from experience as well. We had somebody ghost on us that just didn't want to have anything to do with anyone. She wanted to create a whole new life. And she pretty much just said that and didn't want any contact with anyone. It just was kind of crazy. Somebody in there at that time, probably in her 30s or 40s, decided that she wanted to just cut everything off and start fresh. And there was no reason to either, because she had a great life. But anyway, all right. So you're published by Lake Union. Came out June 1st. You've been receiving some great reviews. How do you handle reviews? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever gotten a bad review?
Oh, yeah. You get both, and yet everywhere in between. I think that sometimes the harder reviews to handle are the ones that are like, this was a good book, but you are not very good at plot, or you're not very good at your characterization, or something where it's kind of a backhanded. I don't like the 3-star reviews very much. The 1-star reviews are I actually find those ones pretty funny, because people, it's almost like they're trying to be biting, and their reviews are kind of more funny than anything, because it's always someone who sounds like they picked up a book and they say, I don't usually read this genre of book, but then I picked up this book and I hated it. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry.
There's a reason why you didn't pick up that genre. Do you let it get to you at all?
Yeah, I did at first. So last year I had my first book published, and it really knocked me right off my feet. Just hearing people say like that I was a bad writer, or that I should not be a writer, or things like that. But then you start to realize that it's just a matter of opinion and a matter of taste, and there's always going to be people who don't like what you make, and that's okay. So,
well, let's talk about how you got into writing. Interesting past that you've had. You were a debt collector for a while, and you said that there's some crazy stories you could write just from debt collecting. That could be a book of its own. But that experience, how did you come into that?
It was just an easy job to get, because nobody wants to be a debt collector. So they're always hiring, and they pay really well. And you don't even have to do an interview. You can just walk in there and say, I would like to work here. And they say, can you start tomorrow? So I was right out of high school and I needed a job, and it was just really appealing to be able to start right away and get paid well.
You were writing a blog, I think, right? That's the way it goes. You were writing a blog when blogs were hip and cool to do. Did the blog writing kind of hone your skill for the type of writing that you're doing now? And what were you writing in your blogs?
Yeah, I started writing my blog in 2008 or something. And I think that was just actually really how I developed a voice. Because I just was writing about, I was actually started the blog when I was working at Staples in customer service. And that was a terrible job. I would way rather be a debt collector than work customer service.
Why so?
Oh, because there were adults getting into fistfights in the lineups. There were women coming up and being like, I don't like the price of this eraser. Can you make it a cheaper eraser? And I'm like, I don't price the things. And so I started writing those stories down, and started writing daydreams I had of Staples burning down. And yeah, and so it just kind of, it helped me to be able to see and it was boring too, so it helped me to kind of entertain myself as I was working at Staples, just making up stories about the customers, or trying to find funny things in things that were actually just kind of maddening and boring, and yeah, trying to figure out how to write them interestingly. So it was good.
Do you find yourself to be a funny person in real life, or do you just write funny?
I don't know. I think I'm funny.
It's hard to say, hey, I'm funny, and then somebody says, hey, say something funny, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm like dryly funny, and I think that a lot of people don't understand my humor. My husband gets my humor, right, and we think each other is funny, so that's good.
Well, the book is, there are parts of the book that are hilarious. And, it just, which is why, as I was reading it, you did such a good job, I felt, of developing the characters and explaining and delivering the characters. So it's a 19-year-old up to a 60-year-old, right? The youngest one, Mackenzie, is 19, Maud is 60, and Suna is in her 30s, 40s, something like that. Okay, so the question is, who are you most like? Which one of those characters?
I actually would say so my first book, I wrote both characters based on myself. And so this one, I tried to write each character nothing like myself. So I would say, like, I'm closest in age to Suna, but I don't really have much in common with her. And I don't really have anything in common with any of them. And I think I did that on purpose because the first book was they always say that your first book is a veiled memoir. And I think that's true.
Oh,
and so the second one was like an anti-memoir.
Your first book, Valencia and Valentine, came out in 2019. Yeah. And then you just turned right around and wrote another one. Does it come that easily to you?
No. So when I sold the first one, I sold it in a 2-book deal. And my agent said that would just be a good idea because book deals are hard to come by. So I did that. But then you have a deadline. And so you just have to write another book in a year. And I don't think I'll ever do that again. It's so nerve-wracking.
You mentioned agent. Literary agents are very difficult to actually get one. First of all, there's a lot of screening process and all that. But you also have your own screening process on your end of what a literary agent would be for you. And I think you probably used that this time around. When you picked a literary agent, most people would say, hey, I'm taking the first one who's interested, because who knows if another one's going to walk by. But you did your research and due diligence to find the right match. What were you looking for?
Well, I have noticed Twitter is actually a really good place to find literary agents and to see what they're like to work with, because they're all on there talking and they're interacting with their clients on there a lot. So you can kind of see their working style. And I've noticed a lot of literary agents on there are very, I don't know, they push their clients to do a lot of work really fast. I'm just not in that place in my career because I have 2 young kids at home. So I wanted a lit agent who would just kind of let me work at my own pace, and she would be encouraging but not too overbearing, I guess. The agent that I ended up with, she's just perfect for me. She kind of lets me do books at my own pace, and she has really good advice, but she doesn't just demand that I pound things out. She's really easy to work with, and there when I need her, she's accessible, but we don't talk more than twice a year, probably, actually.
When you write, what is your process? Do you sit down and say, okay, here we go, and then you just try and figure out, or are you walking around doing some other stuff and you go, whoa, wait a second, I have an idea, and then you run to the computer?
Yeah, that's me, because I have 2 kids, so
right. And they're
play
young.
with my kids, and then they're 3 and 6.
Okay.
So I'll be playing and I'll have an idea, and then I get my phone out and send myself a text message, and then as soon as I can get to a computer, I'll sit down and kind of pound it out. Nap times are when I do most of my work, but sometimes there are no nap times to be had. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you got to work at night. Sometimes I pull all-nighters. Yeah, someday I hope that I can have a more scheduled writing life, but not yet.
Not yet. Well, 10 years from now, maybe. Although one will be 13, and that's a tough age as well. All right. So the story takes place in Regina, Saskatchewan. You mentioned a few landmarks. Are they fictitious or are they real? And like the coffee shop, is it as close to proximity to like the museum or other places that you mentioned in the book? Is that real life type stuff?
Some of it is real life. Some of it, I was actually just telling a friend this yesterday. Some of the places are places that you can go and they're exactly where the book says they are. Like there's a bridge there and that's exactly where it is. And the art gallery, I moved it downtown because I needed it to be downtown. The coffee shop is a real coffee shop with a different name, and I put it in a different spot. So I've just it's a lot of recognizable places that are just kind of shuffled around a little bit There's a Pizza Hut in town it shares a building with a crematorium, which I have always found really disgusting. And so the coffee shop I put next to the crematorium in my book because I thought that was just had to go in there. So gross.
Are these characters based on other people in your life that you know?
Only one is, and he doesn't know which character it is, and I don't think he's going to read the book. I hope he doesn't. But everyone else is just based on nothing.
Yeah,
or based on maybe a person I see in a coffee shop, and I'm like, imagine what they might be like and give them a backstory and put them in a book. But I generally try not to put people I know in books because I'm so scared they'll come across it and know it's them.
Right. As I was reading it, I was so, I think that you write so well that you can, as the reader, you can picture everything that's happening. And I thought to myself, I could see parts of this book as a movie or a made-for-TV movie because of the suspense. There's some suspense in there, and there's some humor and everything else. And then I could also see it as a stage play because there's some laugh out loud slapstick stuff, I think, that goes on. I can't tell you too much about the book because I want you to read it yourself for you guys out there because I don't want to be a spoiler. But of the three characters, two of them, the end is really nice because there's resolve, for most of the people. But one in particular, her life does not get resolved with the person who ghosted her. Why is that? Was there a sequel?
No, I don't think I could ever write a sequel to a book. Maybe I could, but no, I originally had resolves for all three characters, and I wanted to wrap every single storyline up really neatly. But then I just thought part of the point of the book is that you don't always get to know, and I thought maybe that would drive some people nuts because a lot of people don't like getting to the end of a book and not knowing what happens for somebody. But I was like, that's kind of the point. That's the whole thing. So I did that on purpose, and I don't think there will be a sequel.
You heard it here. You heard it first. You had mentioned in another interview that your English teacher saw something in you that she thought was worth investigating and working upon. I had mentioned at the top, my English teacher, Mrs. Monroe, was so encouraging to me in anything that I did that got me interested in writing and enjoying it. Who was your inspiration or your English teacher that found that gem of a talent?
Miss Wilson, she was really she was a very fun English teacher, and she had lots of good ideas and lots of fun assignments and all that. But I don't think she actually liked me very much as a person. And I could just kind of tell I wasn't the teacher's pet, but I think that's why when she complimented me, it meant so much to me because it was just like, she's not just trying to butter me up because she likes me. She actually likes what I wrote. So I think that always made me work harder in her class, and it was like my goal the whole year, every year, was just to get her to read my work out loud in class. Talking
to writers and authors and having my own book that I had put out about my adoption, you go through a ton of drafts. How many drafts before you finally got to the final one for Sorry I Missed You?
Oh my goodness. So this one, because I'm trying to think of what the turnaround time was. It was probably a year I had to write this book, and it had a deadline. I had to turn it in on January 18th or something like that. And so I was going to try and do it very methodically and try and do it in 3 drafts. I thought if I just do my first draft a little bit more carefully and then I can have a second draft. I think I ended up doing like 15 to 20 drafts on this thing because I can't write just from point A to point B. I always write a really crappy first draft, and then I layer in things, and then I remove characters, and I am just a 20 draft girl.
Yeah. Did you have the storyline kind of set, or did the story kind of develop as you were writing?
Yeah, I just had the mailbox thing and the letter, and I just waited to see who would get. I didn't realize who had written the letter until I wrote it down myself.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of how I always work at stuff. So I think I actually didn't write the last chapter for the first 5 or 6 drafts even, because I didn't know how it was going to end. And then every time I wrote a draft, it was like, oh, this person could get closure, or this person could get closure. And then when I finally wrote the 7th draft, I think I was like, oh, I know who wrote the letter.
This book was narrated by Manda Ronconi, who did a tremendous job. I mean, I can't tell you, people, how good a job she did. And I've listened to a lot of books, and a lot of times when you're listening to a book on Audible or anything else, it's predicated how good it is based on how good the delivery is. She did a phenomenal job. I guess the first question is, did you sign her up, or did the agent sign her up, or did the publisher sign her up? And then did you give her direction?
Well, so the publisher asked me if I had any idea of who I would like to narrate it. And I have a friend who Amanda Ronconi narrated her book. And my friend said she made my writing better. And so I was like, that's a good review. So then I went and listened to a bunch of her. Yeah. So I went and listened to a bunch of her audiobooks, and I was like, she is perfect. She sounds like kind of an ambiguous age. She sounds a little bit sarcastic, which is kind of, I like that kind of tone in her voice. She just sounded just the right tone that I had in my head. So I requested her, and they reached out to her, and she was on board. But yeah, I never actually interacted with her one-on-one. Sometimes the producer would say, how do you pronounce this, or kind of that sort of thing, but I never got to interact with her.
Well, it was like she was reading your mind then, because her delivery and the placement of her voice for the different characters was just so well done. Are you working on a new book? You have anything in the works right now? Or are you just kind of sitting back and glowing, basking in all the good reviews that you're getting for this one?
I've written 1 book entirely, and that's with my agent, and she's editing it, I think. And then I have started 5 other books. I keep starting them and then getting distracted, and then I go back to another one. And so, yeah, I'm working on 6 books right now.
Wow. Do you ever get like a writer's block? And if you do, what are some of the things you do to try and get yourself out of it? Or does it just have to run its course?
Yeah, I think it does just have to run its course. I generally find, like, when I get blocked, I just try to take in a bunch of other entertainment, and I watch a lot of movies and read a lot of other people's books, and just wait until it comes back, because you can't force it, which I wish you could. But yeah, I just find that taking in other people's creativity. What
advice would you give to someone who's listening right now or watching right now, who had that same thought you had? I want to write a book. I'd like to write a book. What would be one of the first 1 or 2 things you would suggest that they do to get started?
I would say, first of all, just start, and don't doubt yourself too much, and don't ask yourself too many questions. Someone wrote me an email the other day, and they said, I want to write a book, but I'm not sure who would read it, and I'm not sure, like, if anyone would publish it and all that kind of stuff. And I said, but that's, the writing of it is for you, and so you should just do it. And then afterwards, if someone wants to publish it, they'll publish it, and if people want to read it, they'll read it. But you've already done something, you've already accomplished something really huge, and yeah, you shouldn't do that part for anybody other than yourself.
Right. Well, Suzy, it was great to catch up with you. I'm so glad we got to get this worked out as far as our Zoom call. You are our first international guest, so there's that, just saying, which is pretty cool. And final question for you is, we're kind of in sort of semi-lockdown mode here in the States with COVID-19. What are you experiencing there in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty similar here to what it is in the States. I have a lot of friends there, and things seem to be opening up at about the same rate. I think our playgrounds just opened up on Friday, so that's where we were this morning. So little returns to normalcy, which is really needed.
Yeah. Well, it was great to spend some time with you. Thanks for giving us the time. I know, you've got your hands full with both children and everything else you have going on in your life. So really appreciate that. The book is called Sorry I Missed You. And if you would like to learn more about Suzy Krause, it's SuzyKrause.com, correct?
Very easy.
and just spell the last name for us. It's Krause. Mm-hmm. And Suzy is Suzy.
Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure. SuzyKrause.com. Suzy, thanks so much for joining us. Look forward to your next book. And people, if you get an opportunity, get out there and download the book. You will love it. I'm telling you, I think you will love it. And if you don't love it, send me the review. All right? All right. Suzy, thanks so much. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And that will do it for this edition of the Just Sayin Podcast. Tune in next week when Jerry Kraft joins us for part 2 of our discussion. He's met his deadline. He's now available to come on the show. If you didn't see part 1, which is why he couldn't come on the show because of the deadline, it's episode 6 on the Just Sayin Podcast episode list, Good Books for Kids. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I'm Charlie Cornacchio. Stay safe and be kind. And we will see you next week on the Just Sayin Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Just Sayin Podcast.